Welcome to the Delight Your Marriage podcast, the show where you hear from amazing and inspiring wives sharing their struggles, triumphs, and advice for this journey called marriage. Here's your host, Bella Rose.
Hey there and welcome. This is Bella Rose and I am so grateful that you are joining me. Here we are just in the, second week of January, or is this already the third week? Oh my gosh, it is flying. But I am so excited that you're joining. Today is to dive into what suffering means. You know, I talk to so many husbands that email me in suffering and wives that are suffering, and my heart goes out to them because I deeply know they're suffering. I deeply have been there. And I want to talk about what are the gifts of suffering. And you might be shocked, but I truly believe that there are gifts. And if you don't look at that straight in the face, you're going to miss those gifts. You're not going to receive what you could be from your suffering. I love the title of this book by, who is it by? Well, the title of the book is called Don't Waste Your Cancer. And it's shockingly profound to think that God would actually give you suffering on purpose. But that is exactly what I feel He has done in my life. Okay, so I want to just share a quick testimonial of a husband of 20 plus years. I worked with his wife just a few times. And into just a few times of our sessions, he sent me this email. He said, I just wanted to say a few things like, thank you, exclamation point. Thank you for the time you spent with her, for your generosity. It is much appreciated. I don't know what the two of you discussed. I haven't asked and she hasn't told, but I haven't seen such a fast change in her in ever. It's like she's a different woman. Actually, she's behaving more like the woman I thought I married or wish I had married. The changes I have seen in her are profound. Again, I don't know what you coached her to do, and I don't know if she's doing it all or only half, but I do see a changed woman in my life. So again, I say thank you. All right, well, praise God. To God be the glory. I want to speak to you. I'm so grateful that I'm doing Delight Your Marriage full time now, to God's glory. And I have some time to speak to women for free. So if you are going through suffering in your marriage, get on a clarity call. Let's dive in. I've had some really good responses to women who have just jumped on a clarity call with me. I mean, only that has given them insight into what's really going on in their marriage. So once again, just jump on that call with me and quickly, because I don't have a ton of room to do that in my schedule. So you can go to dym.as.me. That's the full website, www.dym.as.me. And you know, if this episode is going to be tugging at your heart, maybe this is your next step. So yeah, I look forward to talking to you soon. Let's dive in to talk about why suffering is a gift and what my experience has taught me through that. Many of you have probably wondered how old I am, because a lot of people determine whether or not they can listen to someone's advice if that person is older than them, because the assumption is if you're older, then you are wiser. But then we all know the antithesis of that, of there are plenty of older people that are not wiser than younger people. And so, I think God has given all of us specific journeys, specific paths to walk, and all of us have specific lenses that we walk through that path. And by God's grace, I have had many, many women who are older than me either work with me or tell me that my work has impacted them. To God be the glory that He has changed them through my work. So I think it's because God has given me the grace to give me suffering in this life and to perceive it as a gift. Because I think if we don't look suffering straight in the face and name it as such, we don't get to receive those gifts. If we are just ignoring it and pushing it aside and numbing away from the suffering, we're not going through the suffering, then I don't think God can teach us what he needs, that we could be learning if we stared it in the face and said, this is awful, that I am suffering, that this is suffering. Because God can teach us through it. So I'm just going to go through a few of the things that, God has allowed me to suffer, and honestly, they're gifts in many ways. And I'm going to go through what those gifts are and give you quite a lot of biblical understandings, but also just examples and that kind of thing, because I want you to come out of this conversation and say, God has purposed me to suffer in this season, and there is a purpose for it. So for me, growing up, I'm not going to go into it, but quite a lot of difficulty in family life. And then my first marriage was abusive in any and all ways. I also suffered abuse from church leaders, and that was more so emotional abuse of power and even spiritual abuse there. I've suffered deep, dark depression, even suicidism, disappointments for many reasons, even in my second marriage. Just so you guys know, this is not all timing doesn't all make sense in this. It's not chronological order, but I want to tell you a bunch of things. I've been served an eviction notice. I worked at as a house cleaner. I've suffered broken hearts more than once. I've been used sexually. I was overweight, very much so, and it affected all of my self-esteem, all my confidence, and most of my choices were about whether or not I was, too big in whatever situation I was in. I also was bulimic. I have felt never good enough in sex, that I'm not able to have any pleasure in sex. It's only pain emotionally and physically. Another one is I was ostracized by my ex-husband for many, many areas of my life, but also physically, humiliation in significant ways. I've suffered being tricked into spending thousands of dollars that I didn't have, and also giving many tens of thousands of dollars to which I will never receive back. Extended hospital stays, debilitating health challenges that I've had to suffer, shame in sexual vulnerability, and then deep shame in poor choices and some choices that were out of my control. And then I think I'll just end this with saying loneliness. So those are some of the just sufferings. And of course, some of those are just, broad strokes because I don't want to go into it deeply. But I find a lot of hope in what Viktor Frankl said. I don't know if you've read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's powerful. I encourage you to read it. But it is a story. It's a book by a psychologist who was actually a Jew in the Nazi death camps. And he witnessed the horrors. And what he kept his eye as a psychologist, almost like he was viewing what was working and what wasn't. And what were the reasons that some people perished and what were the reasons that some people endured until the end? Like, what was the difference? And it's powerful to read, to hear that he suffered insanely, and yet he was able to see that there were differences. So anyway, there's a quote that he says, there was no need to be ashamed of tears, for tears bore witness that a man had the greatest of courage, the courage to suffer. And so I encourage you in this conversation to acknowledge and become aware of your suffering. Because if you are not, I do believe that people can miss what God is giving them the opportunity to learn and experience and to receive gifts. And that's what I'm going to go through. So the first one, suffering gives you deeper insight. I took this amazing course called The Feminist Epistemology and the Philosophy of Science when I was in college. And I think my favorite thing that it taught me was that someone in a lower, maybe in the oppressed position, is able to see things that the oppressor cannot see. Because it's to their advantage. It actually makes them able to maneuver and be able to have more freedom, in a sense, than they would be able to otherwise. So, for example, women can see things that men cannot see because it's to their advantage to be able to see it. And just like minorities, Blacks, Latinos, and other cultures in the United States, they can see what the majority can't. Because it's to their advantage, because they don't have the privilege institutionally that others enjoy, that the majority enjoys, they're able to see what the majority cannot. And I know this very personally, as having lived amongst and being able to have done a lot of research in this area. I recognize the privilege of the majority, of the white, because I could go into this so deeply because I'm so passionate about it, but by God's grace, minorities have a privilege to be able to see insights that the majority cannot see, and they cannot. I will never be able to see what they can see because they have that advantage of suffering underneath of it. Just like a self-made millionaire can see things that someone that's born into wealth cannot see. They will never be able to live in the way that self-made millionaire had to live in order to earn it. And it causes them to not be fully. It gives them blind spots, is what I'm trying to say. So, for example, this even works in business too. I'm a business. I love business books and literature. But for example, Blockbuster, right? That was a giant, enterprise. I remember growing up, and that was just a huge. That was something that would happen. Going to Blockbuster all the time, and when they started to think that, people would want to receive something by mail or watch something on the internet, they completely shunned the idea that it would never, ever happen. But then Netflix comes along, has a vision, even though they're this tiny, speck, they actually explode, and Blockbuster, they're gone. So David, for example, suffered in the wilderness. Even though he knew he was supposed to be king, he suffered in the wilderness his whole life, his whole young life, and he wasn't around anyone who believed that he was anything more than a shepherd boy. But you know what he did? He suffered and fought the lion, and he did so with the bear, and he suffered in that wilderness. And those struggles gave him the insight and the strength to be able to view Goliath as nothing more than a lion or a bear that he's already been able to conquer. So suffering gives you that deeper insight. The next one is suffer speeds up your learning if you let it. It speeds up your learning if you let it. So for example, Joseph, he was a young guy. He was, everyone, he was the favorite of the 12 brothers. His dad just showered every gift upon him, like the beautiful coat of many colors, but then his brothers, abused him and threw him in a well, and they were going to kill him. But then they, sold him to the traveling merchants, and he was sold as a slave. And then he ended up deciding he wasn't going to just be a victim to this, but he ended up growing and using that, even though he could have just been the camel boy all his life, or just suffered under that. But slowly he just did his absolute best as a slave, and he became the second in command of all of Joseph's household, all of his master's home, which was extensive. And then the wife decided to seduce Joseph, and when Joseph pulled away and wouldn't sleep with her, she pretended like he was trying to rape her, and then he was thrown into prison. And Joseph, again, could have despaired, because that's suffering, right? But you know what? Joseph did not despair. In prison, he used it. He used it to speed up his learning. He used it to interpret dreams. He used it to sharpen what he knew to be true about him. When God gave him those visions, those dreams when he was a kid, he used that even while he was suffering, even while he was in prison. He continued to think about what it's going to be like on the outside. And then he actually interpreted dreams when he was on the inside of the prison. And eventually that's what got him out of prison. Okay, the next one is suffering gives you empathy. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says that God comforts us in all of our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. So suffering helps us to understand that somebody else is suffering, that you can comfort them, that God comforts them through you. Suffering gives you that empathy to see it, to feel it, to know that they are suffering, that you are close to it, and you know that God is with them because God was with you when you suffered just like that. Now, the next one is suffering gives you direction. Moses suffered, right? He was raised in a palace. He, as far as he knew, that was his life. And then he got angry at a guard and killed him. And he was outcast. He was thrown out. So then Moses, took he had to escape, and he had to go to the desert. I don't even know. I mean, he didn't know where he was going. He was just escaping. And then he ended up living for 40 years in the desert. And to imagine that, as someone raised in a kingdom, like everything is shattered, everything that you knew, it was gone. And how long is that going to take? He's in 40 years. Why would that ever change? So maybe that's something that you can identify with. Like maybe you have, grown up with parents that have coddled you. And then now real life hits and you are suffering and you're like, when is this going to change? But you know what? God molded Moses through that. And had Moses not lived in that palace, he would not have understood what it was like to talk to Pharaoh. He wouldn't have had that depth of knowledge of what Egyptians think and what they're like and where they hurt most and how to speak to them deeply. And so suffering actually gives you direction, because Moses, God told him to go back to Egypt and say, let my people go. But if Moses hadn't have known that deeply and then suffered for 40 years not being there, having to have this difference of life, he wouldn't have known how to come back and do God's will. And I think after that, when he was, granted the Israelites, now once again, Moses had that suffering experience, and then that gave him the ability to then continue on that journey to lead the Israelites. I could go on much more about Moses and how he suffered and how that equipped him to do God's will, but I'll keep moving. The next one is suffering clears those people away from you who would distract you from God's will. Now, this is a hard one because, suffering a lot of times makes you lonely because no one can understand it. No one can understand what you're going through. And you can only, it feels like you can only talk to someone so long and then they want to move on. They're like, okay, get over it. But, a lot of times that's God's gift, as lonely as it feels in the moment. But think about John the Baptist. I mean, he was called crazy. He was out in the wilderness. No one acknowledged him for many, many moons. And then what God was growing in him, was a sharpness, was a depth of insight, was a power, because there wasn't anyone to distract him and say, no, don't get on fire for God. No, you don't need to act or think like that. No, put your clothes back on. Let's be normal. And I say, put your clothes back on, because I think he was wearing the crazy clothes in that time. So, but John the Baptist, he was not distracted by people who would have dampened his flame. So suffering a lot of times clears those people out who are not going to support what God wants to do through you. The next one is suffering teaches you wisdom. And I absolutely feel God has done this over and over and over again, because my biggest cry in the most difficult situations are, God, teach me. God, give me insight. Give me wisdom. Here we have an example of Esther, right? She was a young girl, and they stole her from her family, and they made her the wife of a king who had tons of wives, and completely, I just can't imagine how awful that kind of a life would be. But you know what? She didn't lose her identity as a daughter of God, as someone who had a purpose. She didn't lose that. But what she did was she recognized that when God needed her, when God needed to use her, she was ready. And so she was exhibiting wisdom. She kept her eye sharp. She kept a lookout on where God was going to use her, because, she didn't, again, despair, but she used that suffering to teach, to give her wisdom, because she slowly was able to understand how the king looked. Again, it gave her insight, because she knew the king's, what he liked, what he didn't like. She understood that. So she was able to then say, okay, timing is really important. I can honor him with one meal. I can honor him with two the second night. And then the third night, that's when the timing is perfect, because she made sure that she had the wisdom. And I can say that in so much of my sufferings, by God's grace, it has taught me so much. If I hadn't have had that abusive marriage, I would never have been able to understand the depths of insight that I think God has given me now into men's minds, and even the suffering after that of broken hearts and sexual promiscuity and these kinds of things. I wouldn't have been able to, have men, so many of them email me and say, I'm astonished at your insight into the male mind and heart. And others that say, I'm amazed. And, how do you know this? How do you know this? And so again, that's God's grace, but he's taught me through suffering. It hasn't just been an automatic, one guy emailed me he's in the medical field, and he talks to women even about, physical matters at times because he's in that profession. And he's like, but I've never seen someone with the insight that you have on such a deep level. And then he asks me, how do you know this? How did you read about it? How did you come upon this insight? And I think, once again, through the different sufferings by God's grace, he has taught me. The next one is suffering sharpens your faith. And an example of this in the Bible, I think, is Mary. I think that the angel of the Lord came to her. Now, this woman, this young girl, had kept herself pure for her husband. She had done what God asked her to do daily, every single day. She was honoring God, and they had intense commandments. She was a Jew, right? She had intense things she had to do every single day to be holy and blameless before God. And, I don't even know all the details of that. But, when the angel of the Lord said, you have found favor in God's sight, Mary probably, was so excited. And then the gift was that she essentially would be outcast, that essentially she was going to be thought of as promiscuous, that's something that she held so, so dear, her innocence, her virginity, that suddenly everyone around her, was going to be thinking these horrible things. Or even the concern of that, her reputation, all of this that she had been so good about. Mary suffered. And then she was the mother of Christ Jesus. That she was given that opportunity. And she suffered. I don't know how long. I mean, who knows how difficult and the pain that she had to endure. But because of that, she had the insight, the sharpening of faith that this was her son Jesus, who was truly the King of the world. So Mary, her faith was sharpened. The next one I want to talk about is suffering emboldens you if you pass its test. So if you're familiar with the story of Job, he had great wealth, a ton of really good things going for him, for reasons only God understands. All of that stuff was taken away from him. And his health was taken away. His family was killed. All of his wealth was taken away. And Job 2:9, his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. So Job, in the midst of his suffering, is emboldened. And so I encourage you, when you are suffering, that you would be emboldened, that this is your opportunity to pass the test. And you know what happened to Job? He didn't die. And ultimately, everything was restored and more. He had tons more wealth. He's blessed with a new family, plenty more kids. And, it's hard to think that could replace his other ones. I have no idea how that works. But, God was kind to restore all the things that he had lost. And anyway, so that's suffering emboldens if you passed its test. Suffering teaches you to rely on God. And that's kind of, once again, throughout all of the different, like depression and suicidism, I remember the depth of need. I remember just praying every day, like, Jesus, I need you, I need you, I need you, I need you. And that's what it does. It just makes you rely on him. Suffering strengthens you. Daniel, for example, was stolen from his home, but he prayed every single day, 3 times a day. He was faithful, and he ended up having the faith to be in the lion's den, to not move from what he should have done, which was to praise God no matter what. And so he was thrown into the lion's den, and the heart of the king was totally changed and transformed. And that is what impacted the whole kingdom. But because Daniel suffered, he was stolen from his home when he was young. But it ended up changing the heart of the king and the whole kingdom to honor and serve God, to worship him. Okay, and the next one is suffering clarifies true value. So if you talk to anyone who has lost a loved one, anyone at all, you will know that it immediately makes you realize what's really important, what actually matters. And that is your relationship with God, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your friends. People, that's the true value. What it clarifies your priorities. And then suffering makes you look into eternity. 2 Corinthians 4:17 through 18, this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So this verse, I think, is powerful, because it shows us that we need to be looking into eternity. And the thing I want to say is that don't just use your suffering to look at eternity and say something like, okay, heaven's going to be better, I can endure this. That is true. However, Christ suffered. Paul suffered. The early Christians suffered. People are actually suffering all around the world because they're Christians. And that they were working for Jesus in their suffering. That caused them, that eternity view caused them to work in their suffering. It led them to action. They were not despairing in the suffering. Paul, over and over and over again, he was in jail and threatened to be stoned, and yet he just continued. He recognized the suffering. He was looking into eternity, but that propelled his work on earth. So don't just get excited to go to heaven and say, I'm just going to get out of this stuff whenever I die, but actually be excited that God is going to work in the world through this suffering. Whenever it ends, or if it's always going to be there like Christ. Christ suffered. But you know what? Christ is interesting. This is what I truly believe, is that he started his earthly ministry when he was 30. But I truly believe that the years before he turned 30, he suffered. Because had he not, I don't believe he would have had the strength of personhood that he had when he started his public ministry. Because it's not just, he wasn't book smart. That wasn't it. He certainly treasured and knew the scripture inside, outside, upside down. Yes. But there was a depth of strength that cannot be happening, that couldn't have happened if it wasn't out of suffering. He knew suffering. He was no stranger to it. In the wilderness when he was tempted by Satan, come on. It was like he could do that in his sleep. So I just want to encourage you. Christ died for us because of a life that he lived day by day by day. If he hadn't have had that life of faith and commitment and connection with God and habits, I don't believe that just was a one moment decision. I believe it was a day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute decision to be one with God, to do fully what the Father told him to do. So yeah, once again, suffering makes you look into eternity, but I believe it motivates your work in the earth. And then I think that leads me into probably my final point, is that suffering is a catalyst for change in the earth. Once again, looking into eternity, but doing it in the earth. You know, so many people find my work because they are suffering, because of the difficulty, and they say, okay, that is it. We have had the worst fight ever. I am about to leave, or he's about to leave, or he just did leave. And they finally say it's time. But you know what is awful, and I hate to see this, is that when there has been a marriage that has been eroding for years, and then finally someone leaves, or finally something happens, finally a pornography addiction is uncovered, finally an affair is again uncovered, you know, those are the moments that I'm like, how did you not see what was happening? How did you not recognize the disconnection for years? How did you not see that? If we had worked together a year ago, 4 years ago, we could have easily put this train back on track. But now, if someone's outside of the house, you know, if someone has fallen in love with someone else, I mean, that makes it a lot harder. So if you're not recognizing your suffering now and using that awareness as a catalyst for change now, we don't know what's, you know, a year down the road if you just keep on keeping on. It's just gonna, you know, I'm just gonna pray every now and then, and I'm gonna distract myself. I'm gonna numb myself with food, or, you know, Facebook or social media or my friends. I'm just gonna numb it. We're only having sex once a month, but it's okay. No, it's not okay. I want you to have it as a catalyst for change. Because God has too much for you and your husband to be doing, to be suffering in your marriage, but numbing it or pretending it's not happening. And it needs to change before it's too late, before it affects your kids, before your marriage is completely eroded. You know, that the point though is use this as a catalyst for change. Be aware and use your suffering as a catalyst for change as early as possible. Do not let yourself suffer in your marriage and ignore it. See how you can change it. And I say that with deep conviction because I just know that. I know that in my experience. There were places that I absolutely ignored without understanding, and that's what led to the demise of my first marriage. I absolutely ignored from the get-go. And then the suffering I experienced in my second marriage, had I not looked that thing in the face and said, this is got to change. And then by God's grace, it did. He taught me just what I needed to learn to transform that marriage by God's grace. And now, oh my gosh. I mean, my husband in our area is the neighborhood, my people at church call him the playground pastor because he knows everyone in the neighborhood, and they talk to him. And it's funny because he's an introvert, so you wouldn't expect him to be the one that knows everyone, but he does. So God has used both of us because of such dramatic things that I changed. And before, he wasn't even a Christian. So anyway, there's so much that God can do if you, as a wife, make changes and recognize that your suffering needs to be a catalyst for you to change. So it's kind of strange, but sometimes my work is to help women see how bad their marriage is. Because until they're really able to see that they are suffering, that this is not okay, are they able to make the changes? So sometimes it takes some time to actually say, okay, what's really going on here? Is this healthy? Is this normal? Is this okay? Is this moving us to a very bad place? And, I've gotten to a spot in my ministry where I can spend some time with women on the phone, and we can dive into this more, and we can see, okay, what is going on, and what's the suffering? What is the pain points? And we can look into it more deeply, and we can see, if it's a big deal, if it's something that is really deteriorating things. So I have some time. I would love to speak with you on a free clarity call. You just need to schedule at dym.as.me. And once again, I hope that this podcast has helped you to realize that when you are aware of your suffering, you can use it as a gift. And I'm just going to summarize really quickly all the gifts of suffering. Suffering gives you deeper insight. Suffering speeds up your learning if you let it. Suffering gives you empathy. Suffering gives you direction. Suffering clears those who would distract you. Suffering teaches you wisdom. Suffering sharpens your faith. Suffering emboldens if you pass its test. Suffering teaches you to rely on God. Suffering strengthens you. Suffering makes you look into eternity so that you can do earthly things. And suffering clarifies true value. And your awareness of suffering is a catalyst for change. Had I not gone through everything I've gone through, God would not have this ministry for me to walk in. There would not be so much of what God has allowed me to be passionate about, to start, to change, to do, if I hadn't have suffered in the many ways that I have. But by God's grace, He gifted those to me. And I encourage you in what you're going through, potentially, that you would see it as a gift, and it would help direct you to your next steps. All right, my dear, I love you. I'm praying for you that you would have wisdom in these next days and even the rest of your day. What are your next steps? All right, my dear. Well, I am praying for you. I love you, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. If you've been blessed by this, why not share it? Until next time, live with love, wisdom, and passion.